President, colleagues, thank you for the warm welcome. Just to put Susan Quinn on notice, I'm on an iPad, so if you could be on standby, that'd be mighty. Good woman. I confess I was a bit nervous about standing up here today, mostly because this stage has been graced by David Bowie and the Beatles and Frank Sinatra. But I'm far more comfortable, President, that you've put me in the mosh pit. It's far more my milieu. In preparing for this event, I had a conversation with a pal of mine in London, Brian, who's a lifelong Dundee United supporter from up the road. That worked, didn't it? And I explained to him what I was coming here to do, and he went over it slowly with me and said, so Sinead, just to be clear, you're coming up from London to talk to people, to talk to trade unionists about well-being. He said that again very slowly. And then looked at me and said, listen, you know, beneath the apparent impassivity you might be met with when you start on that shtick, be clear that there is an emotional technicolor riot going on inside the body of the Scots in front of you. And why wouldn't there be when I share with you some of the mighty well-being trends that we see now? Some of the latest trends that I think will really appeal to this audience include hay bathing, which has become very popular. It arises from the farmers in the Dolomites. They like to lie down and roll about in a barn in a bit of hay. Great for the health, apparently. There's otomaki from Japan, where you get wrapped up in a big sheet and somebody ties a bow around it. I mean, I don't think that's for everyone. I don't know about the claustrophobes among us might not care too much for that, but apparently it's very good for posture issues. And then, of course, there's this year's big breakout well-being trend has been eye yoga, which, I don't know, you can give it a lash yourself there and see. And, you know, there's plenty more of this stuff. I could go on all day, but I hope to get invited back at some stage, so I'll save that for the next time. Education support has been around since 1877, so we're a whippersnapper organisation compared to you lot. But we were set up by teachers for teachers, and we exist to support the mental health and well-being of everyone working in education across all settings. And we do that in a few ways. You can find out about us at educationsupport.org.uk. And there you'll see we provide free support to individuals. We have a free counselling helpline available 24/7. It's confidential, available to anyone in any role. And we deal with thousands of calls from across the whole of the United Kingdom through that helpline. People who just want someone to have a chat with because they're dealing with something that they are finding difficult, and a sounding board is really helpful, through to people in real distress. And in your work, in your branches, I want you to know that if you're supporting colleagues who are really in distress, liberally pass out our telephone number, the 08000 number. We'd be very delighted to provide support to colleagues in any way that we can. We also work directly with schools on the ground, trying to help schools to become better workplaces, because that's a way that we know can support the well-being of everyone working in education. And one of the things that we do, it's come up yesterday, is professional supervision. We, since 2019, have been delivering supervision to school leaders across England and Wales, and have supported, and Northern Ireland actually, and have supported about 2,000 school leaders at this point with that, which is the biggest, I think, programme of supervision we've seen in education anywhere. And we've done that because we wanted to build an evidence base that makes it irresistible for policymakers to provide that kind of support to educators across the system, and not just leaders. But that's the starting point that we've come from. We also research your health and well-being. You'd be delighted to know you're being researched, I'd say. And we produce reports, as the President mentioned in the introduction there. We produce the Teacher Wellbeing Index annually, but we also produce other research. Last year we produced something called The New Reality, where we benchmarked for the first time the excess work that is not teaching related, that is outside of the stuff you're trained to do, that educators are picking up, and we've used that to try and influence policy. Similarly, we've done work on retention. There's a bunch of stuff, but we try and use that to change the approach of policymakers. And slowly but surely, we are having some impact, I think, in some of the territories of the UK. So that's what we do. And I want to be clear, because I can be a bit miserable when I talk about this stuff. There are many fantastic things about working in education, and you all know that. A colleague said yesterday, and I was very struck by it, that the learning for teachers is bidirectional. You know, that you're learning from children and young people as well as teaching them. And I found that it's not something you hear said very often, or at least I don't when I'm out and about, and it seemed very important to me in that moment. But there's also the opportunity, I think, to be so involved in the future, you know, to have a foot or at least a toe in the future, to have that relationship of transmitting our collective social wisdom, such as it is, to the next generation, and again, seeing what they do with it and where they take it. And of course, in the absence of a revolution of wealth redistribution, education is the most important tool that we have for social justice. And when I'm asked about, well, what's causing the issue for teachers? Why are they, you know, not in such great shape? Why is there such high levels of burnout and stress? What's going on? I like to quickly get to the point that there is no one answer here. This is quite a complex picture. And I just want to talk to you, I suppose, briefly about the things that I think are most significant right now. And thinking about that from the perspective of the overall system, also what's happening in our workplaces, and what's going on for us individually. So that's just what I want to walk through fairly, well, not too quickly, but walk through with you this morning. And we've heard here over the last couple of days an awful lot that speaks to why we are where we are in education. In terms of the overall system, the big ticket items are pretty straightforward. There just isn't enough money in education to do all of the things that teachers and schools are being asked to do. That's the long and the short of it. And that's true in every education system that I've had the pleasure of engaging with. The old ratios for what we expect in terms of investment to support learners to get to a particular outcome don't stack up anymore, because we've peeled away over time so much else that's existed in communities, so much other support through youth clubs and our mental health services and any number of community anchor institutions that no longer exist. And so where does all that go? Well, it comes back to school, because school, of course, is the lovely front door to public services that can never be closed. Other people can say we can't take anymore, we're not answering the phone. In my local authority in London, the educational psychologists just closed up shop. They're just not taking anything at all. It's not unusual. It's very common. I know people here will have experienced that. The resources that are needed across the wider public realm in order to enable schools to support children who are ready to learn, and in order to do the stuff that you do, that only you can do, is a massive issue for the system, and one that we have to get right. We also, I think, have to look again at children and families. The patterns of our social contract have changed. It's not what it used to be. And it takes us a long time, I think, to catch up with that. The scope creep that we see in schools, I think, is a result of this, that we haven't caught up with those changes. And it drives a lot of what teachers describe to us as empty work. Stuff that isn't satisfying, that undermines your job satisfaction, your professional self-efficacy. And so there's a piece of work here to be done to right-size resourcing for the education sector to meet the need that's actually present, and to have some pretty big conversations about that so we all know where we stand. And that, for me, is the biggest piece structurally of what's happening in the education system. But I would also give a nod to another shift that I hope we might be on the cusp of making, which is a move. We've had 40-odd years of a neoliberal worldview that has driven the policy-making environment. And that's led to particular approaches to accountability, to competition, to market values. It's driven bureaucracy in particular shapes and forms. and has focused on output measurement. And I hope, but I believe we are at a point in time where that's run its course. Doing the same old stuff is not going to get us anywhere different. And it's time for us to have public value at the heart of our policy making. So that's... And I haven't even talked about child poverty or additional educational needs or social, emotional, and mental health issues that our children and young people are facing, or the explosion of pornography that our young people are exposed to, and the various other threats to childhood that we're living through. But there's a bunch of stuff going on there that has a direct impact on everybody working in the sector. Inside that, within that system, you then have things that are happening at the level of schools. And I'm just going to pick up on two of those. Again, we could be here all day talking about this too. One of the biggest things that's happening at the level of schools is shock horror, workload and work-life balance. And this matters enormously. The health and safety executive consistently puts teaching in the top 3 most stressful occupations that there are. There's a lot of reasons for that I don't have time to unpack today. But I also would draw your attention to the World Health Organization's report a couple of years ago, where they stated very clearly that working more than 55 hours a week presents a serious health hazard. Now, to be clear, that doesn't mean that working 54 and a half hours a week is grand, feel like. Working excessive hours is a really significant issue. It gives you a 35% increase in your risk of stroke, a 17% increased likelihood of death by heart disease. It affects your immunity significantly, your musculoskeletal system, and there is emerging research that links stress to dementia. Told you I was going to be a bit grim, lads, sorry. Workload is not something that we can ignore anymore. And I know that the union's been talking about this for a long time and people across the country have. But we need to deeply consider and reflect on the emerging data around health and well-being. And that's the kind of sharp end of practice. And we need our school leadership communities to engage with that. It just isn't professional to work in an environment that is habitually overworking. And that needs to become a matter of fact. That needs to be accepted in the same way that it is not professional for me as a leader to open a bottle of whiskey and light up a fag at my desk. It shouldn't be acceptable for me to have people overwork. That should be a reflection and a flag that something's wrong. You are very right to take the position that you do on this contested 90 minutes, and it does need to go to prep time. And our teachers do need more time to think, to reflect, and to prepare to do the work that we're asking them to do. Our school leaders need support to be better leaders. We could kick school leaders here for quite a while. I'm not gonna, sorry. But I talk to them quite a lot, and it's very infrequently that I meet one who I think, dear Lord, I wouldn't want to work for you in a blue fit because you clearly are malignant. I'm not saying it never happened, but it's not the common experience. Most of them are trying to do their best with the resources they have, with the information they have, with what they understand. We need to train them, we need to support them, we need to enable them to lead workforces that are energized, that are respected, that have the classroom autonomy that they want, all that stuff, and that know how to manage workload. Work-life balance is not a soft topic, it's not a fluffy topic. And one of the things that we can do in the education profession is get very, very macho about working hours. Well, I did 70 hours last week, let me tell you. And it's not helpful. Work-life balance increasingly is understood to be the most sort of significant thing that happens to us in terms of negative effects in work. Actually, you can work, whatever the WHO says, you can work quite long hours, as long as you can switch off and recover. If your work energizes you, that's okay. But you have to be able to switch off, you have to be able to recover, and you have to be able to process the stress. And so work-life balance is something our leaders have to understand and be able to lead their workplaces for. We also need more positive, modern cultures in our schools and colleges. We researched this, and for every one teacher that says, where I work has a positive impact, the culture of where I work has a positive impact on my well-being, 2 say it has a negative impact. Then there's a few in the middle who are a bit neutral. But that's really a big own goal, isn't it? Because you all go into this profession full of vim and vigor and passion and wanting to change the world and make it a better place. And schools should be the place where you can do that. You should be able to realize that dream, and that shouldn't be complicated. And somehow, through all the complexity of different factors that are on the go, we've managed to lose that along the way. And too many people are tired and burned out and not feeling that they can achieve what they wanted to achieve in the profession. And I think that part of this comes back to the culture in our schools, and it's part of that story of supporting the development of a school leadership community that can take us to that place. Because organizational change is possible. It's not impossible, it takes time. Some people intrinsically are just great at it. Most people need to learn. Most people need to be trained. Most people need to be supported and held and challenged and held to account on it. And we need for it to matter in terms of of how we think about the education system. We have too much hierarchy, too much status. I see it here in Scotland. In some ways, there's more status consciousness here than in other parts of the UK. There's a lot of deference, I notice. But the job of leadership is about being selective. It's about making tough decisions and standing by them. That's the job of leaders, because we can't do everything, but we need to enable them and support them to do that well. I'm keeping an eye on time, so I'm not going to go too much more into schools. But I guess the point here is that stuff has to change in the overall system. Stuff has to change in the workplaces where we operate. And those are really, really important, because nobody can operate well inside a system that's poorly designed or a workplace that is not well led and managed. But if we are waiting for the policymakers and governments to get this right for us, we are going to be waiting a little while. It won't happen before next year's AGM anyway. And if we're waiting for schools to transform and improve cultures, that's a shorter timeline. But certainly any of the organizations I've worked in where there's been a deep transformation of culture, it's taken at least 3 years to really begin to feel that. So it takes some time. So I want to come back and talk to you about you. And I want to be really clear. This is not me saying, right lads, you're actually responsible for all of this now, so if you could just do your well-being thing better, it'd be grand, all right? It's really not that. But it would be remiss of me to have read and understood as much as I do about the literature on this and not talk to you about you with you. And I think there is a really important question that I ask roomfuls of educators around the country to think about. And that is, how do I do this job and stay well? That's a question that I invite you to reflect on when you drive home or take the train home or whatever, however you take a boat home. I don't know how you get home. I invite you to reflect on that. How do I do this job and stay well? Because if you just focus on the staying well, which, I've not met many teachers who do that, that's clearly not going to do the job, right? But if you just think about how do I do the job, you end up over-indexing on that. And then you get burnt out, often. So thinking about it as one question, how do I do it and stay well, is, I think, a really important thing for us to think about. How many people in this room, so I can tell my friend Brian, how many people in this room are deeply comfortable with self-care? Stick your hand up high and proud. Jeez, I got more hands there than I thought. It's at 5, 6, 7, possibly 10 out of 300. Right. Well, that tells us a lot in itself, doesn't it? And what the science tells us, what the neuroscience tells us, what the psychology literature tells us, and what even now the economists tell us, is that stoicism was not the greatest gift the Romans ever gave us. Like, the roads were good, the stoicism, not so good. And we have to unlearn all of that. We have to peel that back, because what the science is really clear about is that putting your head down and powering through is really damaging. It's damaging for you individually, and I believe it's damaging for you collectively. You could work 70 hours a week and still not be done with the demands of this job. You could keep going until you fall over. And believe me, I spend my life talking to people who fell over. And you still wouldn't be done either. All that would be different would be that you fell over. So I think there is a moment here in that question of how do I do this job and stay well, of thinking, what am I going to put down? And that's not an easy question, because if it was easy, you'd have done it. So there are difficult choices there to think about, what am I going to put down? But since you're not going to get the job done if you do the 70 hours, there's no point killing yourself to get the job done either. There's somewhere in the middle here where we can make some choices about what we do. And I want you to understand about stress, because again, a lot of people would say, God, she bangs on about stress, that Irish one, doesn't she? Stress isn't. I had a very funny conversation with some school leaders, another union elsewhere in the land, who've had me give talks to them for several years. And one of them came up to me afterwards and has just retired and says, Sinead, I have to apologise. I was like, really, why? She said, well, I've been listening to you for years and I've been nodding my head thinking intellectually, that's marvellous, isn't it? It's great what you're saying about stress, lovely, love it, lovely bit of entertainment in the middle of an otherwise full agenda at the annual conference. She said, but what I've realised since I retired is I didn't understand what you were going on about at all around stress. Because I thought being stressed felt bad. I thought being stressed felt really not good at all. And I was loving my job, loved it. At the time of my life doing it, delighted I spent 35 years in it. Didn't at any point think this isn't great. But since I've retired, what I've realized is there's a load of stress I'm still carrying, and that being stressed isn't feeling bad. Being stressed is being wired. And it can feel good, but it's still damaging. Like many things that feel good and can be damaging. And I think understanding that is really important to enable us to make better choices for our health. So I could stand here and tell you to sleep more and eat better and drink less or drink better, I mean, whatever, you choose. We would not send Team GB off to the Olympics saying, right lads, if you could just work around the clock, and when you're done that, maybe you could fill out a few forms about what you did when you worked around the clock and submit those for scrutiny. And just keep going and don't rest. We wouldn't be anticipating a massive haul of gold medals, would we? We'd probably also, of course, if the metaphor was correct, be saying to them, would you mind buying your own pole vaults while you're at it? There is a paradox here, a sort of productivity paradox The demand won't go away, so we have to change our professional relationship to it. And that's going to be a slow revolution. But we have to do that together, and we have to do it collectively in order to make meaningful change, I think. We have to exercise the Alison Murphy no more frequently. Rest and recovery are also not fluffy, soft concepts. That's what we tell the athletes who are going off to the Olympics to do, to rest and recover. Rest in the ways that matter to you. Allow yourself to be absorbed in something else completely different so you switch off. That's when your body starts to recover. Connecting with your purpose, remembering why we do the job, all of that jazz. But the culture of education should not be sacrificial. It should not be hard. That's not something we should accept. We should not allow that to be normal. And that's where we have to, I think, collectively come together to make a difference. So Alan quoted me yesterday when I said, you're a finite resource. And that's right, you are a finite resource. The best teachers are the people who want to teach, not people who come in because there's a financial bonus, because there's nobody else left on the ship, do you know? You are the best people to work with our learners and our young people. So we need to break out of this culture of overwork. We need to support each other to do it. And since I like all this therapy, softiness stuff, you could think about it as a sort of group overwork rehabilitation project. I'd be very happy to see a motion on that here next year. I know I'm tight on time, so I'm going to stop there. I want to thank you for all that you do. I've sat up there for a couple of days listening, and what I've heard is care and compassion and ambition for young people. And I found it deeply moving. What you do matters enormously. You change lives, you might know it. On my way up here, I stopped off in Glasgow to have, I was on the train from London, stopped off in Glasgow to have a cup of tea with the headmistress of my secondary school, who's a Glaswegian who'd retired back to Glasgow. And there she came out, Mrs. Traynor, she's about yay high, 80. And we had a lovely chat. And she said to me, Sinead, I couldn't know what your life would be like. And isn't it great to hear it? And imagine you're here now, and imagine you're away off to talk to a room full of teachers. That's gas. And so I've forgotten what it was like to be in education. You've reminded me. I said, Mrs. T, you were superb. You were a role model for me. You changed my life. You talked to me about what women could do when nobody else in 1980s Ireland was going to have that chat. And that changes lives. You may not always know it, but it changes lives. If this event had been silently broadcast with subtitles so that I didn't hear the accents, I would know that I was at an EIS event for two reasons. One, because ye talk about social justice all the time. It's like balm for the soul, I have to say. And the second one is because you're always reciting poetry, it seems to me. And I'm not going to attempt to do that, but I am going to rehash a quote that Faye finished off the Fringe that she ran on stress yesterday with, that I think is so important. Because changing the world, which is what you all set out to do, requires real discipline. But not discipline in terms of doing more work, lads. That's not the thing. And Audre Lorde, who is a civil rights activist, a feminist, a writer, has said this sentence, which I think is so powerful, so it's what I want to leave you with. She said, caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it's self-preservation. And that is an act of political warfare. You're going to make me cry now. Mrs. T will be dead proud all the same, though. Go well, lads. Take care.
Paulie.